I'll let everybody connect for a second. We'll go ahead and get started. Well, hello, everyone. Welcome to Miami Beach Urban Studios Live Art Talk. I'm Colette Mello, and I'm here today with artist Diana Shpungin. These art talks are made possible through the support of the City of Miami Beach Department of Tourism and Office of Cultural Affairs. I'd like to take this opportunity to thank Professor Tom Cicluna for organizing this art talk. Diana Shpungin is a Brooklyn-based, Latvian-born American multidisciplinary artist who has been exhibited extensively in solo and group exhibitions in both national and international venues, including the Brooklyn Museum of Art, the Sculpture Center in Long Island City, the Aldrich Contemporary Art Museum in Connecticut, Mass MoCA, and Futura Center for Contemporary Art in Prague, Czech Republic, the Bass Museum of Art in Miami, and the Locust Projects in Miami as well. She is also the recipient of awards and residencies from the Foundation for Contemporary Arts, the MacDowell Residency, the Lower Manhattan Cultural Council, and the CEC Artslink, just to name a few. Diana Shpungin's work has been reviewed in publications such as Artforum, Art in America, the Brooklyn Rail, Flash Art, Hyperallergic, Le Monde, New York Magazine, the New York Times, Time Out London, and Sculpture Magazine, to name a few. She received her MFA from the School of Visual Arts in New York and is currently an assistant professor at Parsons, the New School of Design in New York. I would like to go ahead and hand it over to you, Diana. Thank you so much for joining us. If you could tell us where you are today.
Hi, thank you so much for that lovely intro, Colette. And thank you so much, Tom. It's so nice to see you, Tom. Hi. So where am I today? I'm in Brooklyn in my live work studio loft in Williamsburg, Brooklyn. And it's so nice to been invited to do this and reconnect with the Miami community a little bit. So let me share my screen here a little bit. Give me a moment. Can everyone see that okay?
Yes, perfect.
Yeah, okay, great. Okay, so I'm going to show a lot of images, and forgive me if I go quickly. At the end, I love questions, so feel free to ask me anything. Hi, Adrian, by the way. I see you. I'm going to go through kind of like the last 10 years of my work. Not everything, just sort of maybe 10 or so big projects that I've worked on. And for those that don't know my work deals with drawing, but not in a conventional sense. So I'm kind of known for maximizing the simple, humble pencil and dealing with themes of kind of mortality and failure, and the poetic and political, and how those two things kind of coincide. So when I speak to students, let me use this here. When I speak to students, I change my talk a little bit because I think about when I was a student and what I was looking for, and you're always kind of looking for, what is my contribution? What can I do that's so unique? Where's my place in this strange art world that we're all a part of? And I've always loved this quote by Dennis Oppenheim, where he says, "You are never fully prepared for the type of artist you're going to become." So if I read that when I was in graduate school or undergrad, I would have not really thought much of it. But as my career's unfolded, I've done all kinds of things that surprise even me. I started out in a collaboration for a decade. I had like this whole other career. And then started making my own solo body of work. And you'll see like my work deals with very personal themes, political themes. And if you told me that I would be making this type of work years ago, I would have said, no way, that's not going to happen. But I really believe that you have to just listen to those things as a student and as an artist. It never stops. to where your work is taking you. And oftentimes the things that you reject might just be the most interesting things. So go towards the things that you fear. So one of the main influences in my work, and just basically my art god, is Felix Gonzalez Torres, which most of you probably know, living in Miami. And Felix really, to me, I love minimalism, I love conceptual art, the personal, the political, basically embodied all of that for me in a perfect body of work. And so this quote from Felix really sums up, I think it's one of the best quotes of why we are artists. Above all else, it was about leaving a mark that I existed, I was here, I was hungry, I was defeated, I was happy, I was sad, I was in love, I was afraid, I was hopeful, and I had an idea and I had good purpose. And that's why I made works of art. Really kind of simple, but perfect. So when I had my first, I call it my solo show, so outside of my collaborative body of work, it was just after the death of my father, and it was called Untitled Portrait of Dad, which was named directly after Felix Gonzalez Torres' work that actually resides at the De La Cruz collection in Miami. And so that work was about Felix's father. And this show, amongst other things, I think Felix's work is very complex and has many, many different interpretations. So, but for me, I really liked the idea of thinking about this exhibition as not really a memorial to my father, but really kind of thinking about what death is, how do we look at it culturally, how do we look at it personally and politically, what are the kind of frameworks that work within that realm, and also looking at the show of like who are your own personal influences, personally and art historically. So this show was sort of about Felix and my dad simultaneously. So that, I keep using the wrong button, excuse me. So this is one gallery from that show, and there was a series of sculptural objects. With my work, whenever you see this dark gray color, that's graphite pencil. So my work uses, that's basically just hand-coded pencil, multiple hours and hours of work applied by hand. People often ask me, well, why don't you just spray it? Why don't you just do this? And it's really about the labor, the obsession, the kind of sitting there and meditating on the object, encompassing, kind of encasing the entire object, really kind of instead of casting it or using some fabrication method, it's about really kind of maintaining that hand being evident in the process. So I'll just talk about a couple pieces in this show. So this is the very first work that I made that I didn't even know was going to be a work outside of my collaboration. So when my father died, I took a death portrait of him, and just privately, not to make an artwork. And I could never look at it. I could never look at the photograph. It was too painful to look at. So I just decided one day, you know what, I'm just going to like force myself to look at this and draw it over and over. So I decided I wouldn't give myself any rules, and I drew it until it lost kind of all content. So it just became almost an abstraction. So I was left with these drawings, and this is how it's displayed in the gallery. It wasn't even important that you see every drawing. This is one of the drawings. And then after I had these drawings, I thought, well, what am I going to do with these besides just like show them as drawings? So I decided to animate them, which seemed kind of perfect and ridiculous simultaneously, because you're animating the same, virtually the same drawing over and over of someone that's inanimate. So this is a clip of the video, and people often ask, oh, does anything happen? And I'm like, no, nothing happens. That's the point. So this one is called Until It No Longer. This book, Roland Barthes, Camera Lucida, which I'm sure some of you have read. If not, you should. It's a quick read and kind of poignant, and was really important to me. And without giving you like the whole thesis of the book, there's a part in it where Bart talks about his mother, and the whole book's about photography and what makes something a photograph versus a snapshot. But he talked about finding this image of his mother, and he refuses to show it to us because it wouldn't have the punctum, as he called it. And he was trying to explain that that's what separates, your Instagram selfie from, a great work of art that's a photograph. So it got me thinking about, like, what is the personal? Why are we afraid of the personal? What makes something too sentimental, too nostalgic? Is it, about something that's painful or salacious? And I thought, well, how do you reveal, or how do you explore the personal without falling into all those tropes? And I thought, well, it's about what you reveal and what you conceal. So I decided to kind of search for my own photograph. And I don't know if you could hear the sound on this, but maybe I'll turn it down. So I decided to, can you hear me? Yeah. Okay, so I decided to look for, my version of Bart's photograph of his mother, but of my father after he passed. And I found this photograph of him on the beach, like in a Speedo. He was, Eastern European. So Speedos were like, well, you're from Miami, so I don't have to explain this to you all. There's lots of Speedos in Miami. But, he was an older man with a belly and he wore a Speedo. So I thought this sort of image encapsulated humor, arrogance, love for nature, like just kind of really complex dualities. So I thought, oh, this is the photo. I'm going to do something with this. And so I drew it. And of course, it's like the silhouette repeats itself in my work sometimes because that's a way of making something a little more anonymous. But then when I zoomed in on the photograph, I realized that he was holding onto this seagull's leg. And I'd never noticed that growing up looking at this photograph. And I thought, oh, that makes it even more interesting. Like maybe that was subconscious, like some kind of trying to capture nature. It's almost sadistic, even though, he wasn't trying to hurt it, but the idea of like wanting to pet or feed a wild animal. So that work is called Endless Ocean. Actually, it's in the collection of Francie Bishop Good in South Florida, who you all know probably. And then this work, I kind of think of the Rosetta Stone of my practice. So my father was a surgeon, big influence on my body of work. I would never make this body of work if it wasn't for his death, which is kind of amazing and strange and sad. So he was a surgeon. He was a child Holocaust survivor. He had this very filmic, kind of tragic and triumphant life. And he was very frugal. So even though he was a surgeon, he would repair things around the house with the means of his profession. And he would, he was a minimalist, but not in the Donald Judd sense of the word, more like just based on, necessity. So our house was very sparse and, just things that you needed. And no matter how expensive or cheap an object was, it would all be repaired. So he also was an avid gardener. So here you have like a limb, a tree limb, a human limb, a tree limb, and a furniture limb, all kind of repaired in the same way. And this was another work that I made in that show that is called I Especially Love You When You're Sleeping. I should say, like, I'm telling you all these backstories. When you approach my work, everyone comes to me with their own stories. It's pretty interesting what comes out of it. I love the dialogue with the public. It's kind of why we show work as artists, to see what other people think. This thing that was in my head and now it's out there and it's in your head now, and how do you process it? So these are the backstories of why I made these works or how I made them, but it's not necessarily what I expect you all to see in them. This particular work was an orange tree sapling that I gave to my father just before he died, but he could never plant it. So he had a whole yard full of different fruit trees. It was sort of a ritual that I would give him every birthday, Father's Day, every holiday, basically a tree. But the tree died because my father died. So it was sort of like a wake for the tree. And And then with everything, there's always dark and light. So this wasn't about a memorialization. It was really kind of looking at how we think about death. So what you're looking at on the sides here is a split stack of New York Times obituaries that I collected over a couple of years. And in those obituaries, not one bad thing was said about anyone. It's kind of amazing. Like no bad people died in, whatever year that was, 2010, 11, 12, something like that. So it got me thinking like, is that superstition? Is that religion? Is that fear? Like, why do we do that? Why is everyone in every obituary either like very generic or memorialized in a really positive way? So the title, I especially love you when you are sleeping, is a phrase my father said to me, which seems sweet, but is actually sort of mean. And I thought it was a kind of a nice metaphor for this, because there's like a poetic kind of beauty in this, and also like obviously the macabre nature of death, but also culturally how we look at it. And so people always ask me, how do you do that? How do you cover things in graphite? Every object is different. It's trial and error, different kind of techniques. This one was very challenging because citrus leaves have oil in them. So I had to kind of dry them out and put them in the oven. I had to try all kinds of different things to get them to stabilize. And there's a detailed root system. This was another work. Growing up, I lived in a very superstitious household. So my father was a man of science. He was, culturally Jewish, but not religious. And so I think it's very, I was born in Riga, Latvia, as Colette pointed out. And in Eastern European culture, especially because of, living under the USSR, superstition was very common because religion, wasn't allowed or people are repressed. So it was sort of funny to live in a house with a man of science that would be really superstitious. So every time I left the house, my father would make me sit in a chair just for a second, the closest chair near the house, near the front door, excuse me. And that would mean that I would safely return. So, and he would do this to anyone that he liked that came over. So this was sort of my version of talking about that superstition. The title is A Fixed Space Reserved for the Haunting. So you have a broken chair, you have, it's covered in graphite pencil, you have a stack of New York Times obituaries that are kind of wrapped akin to a cast. And I think I have a detail. Yeah. And then the obituaries are all censored, so it becomes like a generic memory of anybody. Okay, let's see. Then in another gallery of that space was kind of like, I guess, the main work in the show called 1664 Sundays. And it was a ton of potatoes that you could take as the viewer. So thinking about Felix Gonzalez Torres' stacks and piles. And so this was my kind of version of that, an homage to Felix and an homage to my father. And so, and also thinking about the personal and political. So here you have like the stack that you take. And this was a hand-drawn recipe of my father's that was signed and numbered. So they were editions. And oops, that's David Hammond, hold on. And then there was a hand-drawn animation of my father that was just sort of stills because you could hear his voice telling this potato story. And the potato story in a nutshell is basically my father in, communist black market times got his very first car by trading 15 tons of potatoes because you couldn't get a car at that time. Even if you had money, you had to wait in line. Things were really scarce, but he figured out some weird back channel. It doesn't make sense to an American audience, but the Eastern Europeans totally get this. So he told this story growing up. So, months before he died, he was telling it to me again on his in his hospital bed. So I have the story being told, you have that personal and political story. And then you have the recipe, which my father and I didn't agree on a lot of things, and food was one of them. I don't eat meat, and like I don't eat like pickled herring or all like those things that my father ate. But the one thing he cooked for me is like this bowl of fried potatoes every Sunday. Um, and so this is the recipe for that. So you would get the bag, fill it with the potatoes, take it home, make your own version of this recipe. So something political turns into something personal and then goes out into the world and creates its own new consciousness, if you will. And so that was that show. And then this is a David Hammond's work. And I like including this in here because the concept of empathy is very important to me in life, but really in terms of artwork, I ask myself, like, why do I like certain work? And it's often like, I remember this was one of the first works that I saw when I was very young. It's actually in the Rubel collection in Miami. Does anyone recognize it? Yeah. So, and actually, I think this image of it doesn't quite do it justice. It feels much more noble than it is. It's sort of like sad and pathetic in real life. And I mean that as a compliment. But I remember looking at it and just thinking, oh, this artwork needs a hug, you know, but like I had this real empathetic, strong, visceral reaction to it. And it really made me think about how we use materials and objects and, you know, reference the body with inanimate objects. So that was another big kind of influence. And I'm just going to show you a few random sculptures in there. This one's called I Can't Hear the Ocean. It's drywall, sponges, seashells. The materials that I use even to this day, many of them are still referenced, you know, my household growing up. Drywall, sponges, like they're like the sense memory of my material toolbox. So drywall, even though we all live with it, my father was paranoid. So he would hide things in the walls of his house, like documents, jewelry, money. And I think that came from, you know, how he grew up. And sponges he would use like to prop up tables or, you know, just things, whatever you had around would be like a practical use or impractical maybe. This was a work I made when I was at the MacDowell colony. I made a series of these kind of repaired limbs. So kind of imagining what the part of the tree that was broken off looked like, right? Just sort of like this tree limb in the forest that would die and no one would pay attention to it. I like the idea of like memorializing it and giving it kind of not really a new life because things aren't really repaired in my world, even though they're repaired. They're sort of fixed in a state of disrepair, if that makes sense. Here's another work called Broken In and Out. And this was actually my drawing chair. So most of the materials that I used are things that were genuinely my objects that I worked with or somebody gave me. I try not to buy too many things, but you'll see a work that I made recently that kind of reveals the facade of that. Because, you know, as artists, we often have like our shtick or what we're known for, but then really there's lies underneath that. So I like revealing those lies. And I love the idea of failure as a concept. So that was my drawing chair and it started kind of breaking. So I thought, oh, I'm gonna make it into a sculpture. There's a detail of that. Then, how are we doing on time? Are we doing okay? So then I was asked to make this large project. So there's an organization called Site Lab, who is based in Grand Rapids, Michigan, asked me, they said, what would you do to a house? And I jokingly said, like seriously joking, I said, oh, I'd cover it in graphite pencil because that's what I do. And this is how things happen. I'm going to just tell you the real story. The director took me out to brunch, got me drunk, convinced me this was a good idea. And for real, like 4 Bloody Marys later, because I wanted to do it. It's not that I didn't want to do it. I just budget, timeline, labor. So they flew me out and there was a bunch of structures to choose from because Habitat for Humanity had given them kind of 2 blocks of abandoned structures that they were going to rehabilitate or build new homes a few years later. So I felt good about that because in terms of public community projects, it's so important that the community's on board and they're involved. And I didn't want to be some city slicker artist coming in there and offending anyone. But I will say Site Lab did an incredible job, and it was an amazing experience. I was so nervous about it, but it was amazing. And I didn't have like one bit of backlash anywhere. It was phenomenal. So what did I do? This is how I found the house. This was a former Catholic rectory, and it was abandoned for many years. And there was drug activity and prostitution and homeless people living there. And the inside of the house was a sight to be seen. And they cleaned it up by the time I got there, and still was a sight to be seen. It was like a whole history inside. And you don't ever see the inside of the house in my project, but I certainly used a lot of the narrative, good, bad, indifferent, in how I approached it. So this was a different approach because this wasn't about my own personal narrative. It was about a place that I didn't know. So I had to really rely on the community and kind of create a more ambiguous statement, but also involve the community. So this is how I found it. And then I also thought about other artists that I admired that made monumental house projects. So this is Rachel Whiteread's Ghost Project, where she filled a row house, the last remaining one, with concrete. So you're looking at the negative, and it doesn't exist anymore. It was temporary, but really beautiful gesture. Mike Kelly's mobile homestead, I really loved. He recreated his childhood home and, toured it around, brought it to the museum. And of course, Gordon Matta Clark. I mean, my initial idea was like, oh, I just want to chop the house in bits, but I'm like, nope, Gordon Matta Clark already did that. But really kind of thinking, what are these iconic house projects? Because the house is such a universal symbol. So we covered the whole thing in graphite pencil. And I say we because if it was just me, I would still be there right now. This was 2015-16, this project. And we had about 100 people working on it for, I'd say, 6 months or so. And from people in the neighborhood to, art students to kindergartners, some random person just walking by, like anyone could, take a pencil or a graphite stick and do a section of the house. And the only instruction that I gave people was to cross-hatch. So that way you have this kind of universal kind of feeling to it. It's unified, but also if you look at each kind of piece of siding, you can see the individual hands. So it's this kind of collective of different people's hands and marks and leaving their impression on this house. So this house had a lot of really personal memories for a lot of people. The town pastor lived there. And one day the pastor actually came by, not knowing any of this that was going on, but he had moved a long time ago and just happened to be driving through the neighborhood when I was there. And he pulled over and he was like, oh, hi, I'm Pastor Steve. And I was like, oh no, I'm a heathen. What am I going to say to this guy? And I mean, I had good intention, but still, like, talking to a pastor made me nervous. So he was actually very hipstery. He had a fedora, and like it was kind of interesting. So he sat on the stoop with me and he started telling me all these stories about his time there. And it was actually really lovely. And then he also drew on the house. So really it was like this collective history coming together in the mark making. And it really had this surreal, I'll go through some more images, that had this really surreal feeling, even though it's something as simple as a pencil, in this mass quantity outside on a surface you're not used to, it had this very strange, uncanny kind of feeling. Even I, knowing the material, didn't really understand what I was looking at. Every time of day, it would look different. So light conditions, weather, we photographed it all through the different seasons. So it looks really matte or really shiny. You could see some of the details. It was very large, the house. It was 2 stories, but also it was about 4 times as long as it was wide from the side. We covered every single inch of it. Here it is in the snow. This is the back porch. The title of the piece is Drawing of a House, Triptych. And so I like serendipitous moments a lot with my work where things just sort of perfectly come together or feel like fate. So the address of the house was 333. I didn't make that up. That was the address. So I thought, oh, there's some kind of omen here. So I started researching that number. It's actually the number of the Illuminati. It's the number of Gabriel, the fallen angel. And it's actually my numerological number is 9. So I thought all of this was sort of a strange serendipity. So the fallen angel, right? It's a Catholic rectory, the Illuminati, some kind of notion of mystery. So I thought, well, how do I honor this number? So I made 3, besides just the pencil, because that would have been enough, but I made 3 triptychs on either side of the house that at night were hand-drawn animations. So this is how it looked at night. So you had 3 in the front, 3 on the side, and 3 on the back. And each side kind of had a different kind of feeling. I wouldn't say they were narrative. They were definitely kind of ambiguous, thinking about the lifespan of a home and looking at light and darkness, because the house had really kind of beautiful narratives and then really dark narratives. There was like a wolf spider infestation in the house. The basement looked like a horror movie ready to be filmed. I found a live baby rattlesnake in the backyard, which was kind of crazy. So all these very dark things, but then like these beautiful stories. So I wanted to kind of honor that because I think everything is light and dark. Nothing is purely wonderful or purely wretched. So the front of the house was a little more narrative. And because this is a talk, I can't show you every single video, but if you're interested, you go to my website, or I have a Vimeo site too, that you could watch all of these things. A little bit different than seeing it within the house, obviously, but you could get a better idea. Here's the front videos. Nothing was in sync purposely, so it would always line up differently. You'd never know what was going to show up with what. In the case of this last one, they all have, I love titles. Titles are really important to me. I'll talk about that more in a moment. But so this work at the end, this one's called A Severed Limb, Persuaded to Return. And I thought, like, what's the most boring, mundane thing I could put in a window? And I'm like, a houseplant, like just like a boring houseplant. And then I thought, well, how does this houseplant fit into this narrative? So the idea of nurturing something, caring for something, you'll see like the plant gets watered, but then destroying it, right? Which is what happens to many houses around the US, especially, I guess, Michigan, Detroit comes to mind. And so what is the lifespan? And now the people in the neighborhood really talked about this project as kind of giving the house a grand finale and allowing them to kind of think about those memories before it moved on to something else. Here's the side of the house. This was much more kind of ephemeral, dealing with abstraction and mark making. And the back of the house was a little more sinister. So referencing horror movies. This one was sort of an ode to David Lynch's Blue Velvet. And here's the side door. Maybe I'll talk about this one. So this one is called A Smudge May Well Be an Apparition. And language and titles are very important. Like, I capitalize every word of titles, because if I use a the or an or an and, like, those are specific reasons why I use the exact words. So I capitalize everything. So a smudge may well be an apparition. Means that I don't necessarily believe in these things, but who knows? So I use a lot of things with superstition and religion and, crystal healing and all of these kinds of things that we as humans create to understand the world. To me, that's why I make art. Like, to understand the world is through art making. So with this work, I made I don't remember exactly, but about 100 probably drawings that I just said, I'm going to make drawings that are smudges with no representation. And let's see if anything appears in those smudges. And lo and behold, Jesus did appear in one of the frames. So if you look really closely, you could see the crown of thorns. Can you see my cursor on this? Yeah. You could see the crown of thorns, his eyes, his little beard, and like a halo. So when you see the drawing like in person, it's clearly Jesus. It's amazing. So, you know, there's humor in my work, even though it seems dark, there's humor, it's tongue in cheek, it's light and dark. I like to think it encapsulates every polar opposite in one thing. And a lot of these works get shown in other ways. So this was one of the works from the side in the back of the house that became a diptych, and I've shown several times. This work is a kind of reprise of the potato piece that you saw in the Untitled Portrait of Dad show. So I was asked to bring the work to St. Petersburg, Russia. This was 2017 or 18, I think. And, you know, which is interesting looking at this piece now with what's going on with Ukraine and Russia being, you know, so isolated. But I totally separate the Russian people from the government, as we should most places. So I brought this piece to St. Petersburg, a city that my father knew well. And we got a ton of potatoes. We put it in a public square, so very different than a New York gallery. And it was a really busy public square right in between like 2 subway stops. And it was mostly normal people. So this happened during this Art Prospect Festival in St. Petersburg that CEC Artslink puts on. I don't know if it's every year, every 2 years. And so I decided, let's put it in a public square. And then I thought about, well, Malevich was, died in St. Petersburg, Kazimir Malevich's Black Square. And so I thought, well, let's make this like an ode to Malevich as opposed to Felix Gonzalez Torres. So the bags are black with this white square, the black square platform. This woman here, she was basically the staff for the festival, and she would hand out the bags to people. And very different than in New York. So in New York, when people took a bag, a lot of people didn't want to put the potatoes in the bag in New York because it was like, oh, this is a signed edition. I'll just like put the potatoes in my purse. But in Russia, people didn't care about the art. They cared about the potatoes. They're like, free potatoes. And they would like fill the bag and fill their backpacks. And, I just said, don't tell anyone they can't take potatoes. Just like let people take them, because people are hungry and people are also suspicious. Like, what do you mean they're free? Like, they're very confused. And they asked, but actually there was like this young guy that delivered the potatoes, and he was asking about the work, and he was super smart, like really interested in anthropology. He didn't know anything about contemporary art. But he asked me to explain what I was doing, and I did. And he was like, oh, this is really interesting. And you know why? And I'm like, why? And he said, because in Russia, no one gets anything for free. And so when you give something away for free, people are very suspicious. But you're playing on that notion. But then the story, so this was a lovely, like 95-year-old woman who I chatted with for a while. I speak Russian very poorly, but I got by. And so what you have here, when you enter the square, you have the story written out in both English and Russian, and you have these QR codes where you can watch the video. So people were instructed to read the story, watch the video, get the bag, get the potatoes. And we had like potato theft at night. Like the whole thing was sort of locked down, but there was like thieves that came and stole potatoes. It was all very dramatic and interesting, but it really told you like how differently different artworks will be perceived in different settings and different cultures. So then I did a residency at a place called Dieu Donne, which is the largest contemporary art paper making mill. And they work with contemporary artists, everyone from like Jim Hodges to Nayland Nari Ward recently. And I got a residency there. So they give 4 residencies a year and they produce a body of work for you. And, I did it sort of for fun. I like challenging myself as an artist, like getting myself out of my own head and using new materials, see what happens. I didn't expect like too much from it, but it actually really changed the way I thought about my work. And now they have me addicted and they make like a special paper for me. So what you're looking at here is a paper mache chandelier. So they made this custom graphite paper for me. I brought them in like a sample of like graphite, coated paper, and they kind of replicated that as close as possible into a pulp. And now they have my recipe on hand and I use it for different things. So you're looking at this paper mache chandelier, and then this is also handmade paper on a pedestal, but the shadow is hand drawn. So you have this duplicitous shadow that's, different layers of graphite pencil. And oh, there's a detail of it. You could see a little better. This one's called A Light from Below. And then behind here, so these are all cast paper. Whenever I do something new, I'm like, well, stick with something and then branch out. So these boarded up windows I did first, kind of thinking about the house project and getting that to live on a little bit because the house no longer exists. I do have parts of it. The director sort of chopped the house in bits, and I have like, portions of the back porch and boarded up windows and different kind of mementos from it. So I guess I got to do the Guardamata Clark thing after all in some small way. So what you're looking at here are castings. I often say about my work, it's a lot of labor for very little effect, because there's so much labor, so much time, complicated methods. So each one of these boards you're looking at is an individual mold of plywood that was cast with paper pulp. And there's no detail here, but on my website, you could see the detail. And then even the screws. So there's little paper screws that are also put in here, and you could see all the wood grain and everything. They're really quite detailed and beautiful. And then I made these cast mirrors for scale, like a person would be like this big. So these are really large. This was shown at the Children's Museum of Art in New York City, in Tribeca. And actually one of my favorite things, people sometimes are like, oh, kids, who cares if kids see your work? But I love talking to kids because they often have a much more insightful approach. So there was like an 8-year-old girl that saw this work, and I'll show you a detail of it so you understand the surface. They're cast broken mirrors. So I collected broken mirrors over the course of a year from different friends and places. And everyone's like, oh my God, bad luck. How could you do that? But the whole idea of the piece was to reverse that. So like you're making a positive and negative by making a negative of a positive. Does that make sense to everyone? Okay. So the 8-year-old girl said, oh, I know why this artist made these in paper, because mirrors are light and bad luck is heavy, but good luck is light and paper is light. So I thought, oh, what a beautiful conceptual mind for this 8-year-old kid to just sort of sum that up that way. And then just before the pandemic, I was asked to, have a solo show at Museum of Contemporary Art in Tucson, Arizona. And I decided to show all my animation work. So I don't remember exactly how many, I don't know, somewhere between 15 and 20 animation works. And I made they commissioned 2 new large scale animation works for this show. And I'd never shown my drawings before from the animations. So every animation that ranges from 40 drawings to 600 drawings. So I have thousands and thousands of drawings in flat files that I've never shown. I just show the animations, which seems self-deprecating and strange, but I just never thought of the drawings as art. I think of them as part of the process. So, but the curator said, no, let's show a drawing from every animation. So as you walked into the show, there was a long hallway. And so we had one drawing from every animation lining down the hallway. This is just a portion of them. And then there was 4 galleries with installations of the work. So there was one room that I called the dad room. So that was like the first works that I made. And this is sort of like a panoramic overview of the largest room. And you could watch all of these, online. It's hard to do that in a talk. And it was, I love when you have a solo show and you group things together, whole other narratives happen. It's like the works exist on their own. But then once you put them with something else, like I learned from my own work, like I walked into the space and I was like, oh, this is so interesting. I didn't realize I did that. Like you kind of threads and tendencies emerge once you get them in the same space together. And you could see some of the works from the house. And then this was the new work that I made. So this is a large floating piece of drawing paper that it's projected on. You can see the rough edges there. And I actually have a clip of this work, so I'll show you that. It's called To Extinguish the Sun. And I'll talk about the process of that a little bit. So this work was maybe the most experimental animation that I made, in the sense that it wasn't based on any photographic imagery. It was really me making these drawings of the sun, or like celestial skyscape, and then destroying them. So I like that idea that like I'm in charge, and I like the idea of like celebrating my own failure publicly. I know most people don't like this, but like once you like it and you embrace it, it's very liberating. So I made 66 drawings of the celestial skyscrape, and then I proceeded to destroy them in every way I could think possible. So you end up with 500 to 600 different new drawings in the process of the destruction. So they were stabbed, crinkled, saturated with water, lit on fire, all kinds of things like that. So you're watching this kind of destruction unfold. And then at the end, the shadow of my hand actually comes in and like pinches the sun, kind of like the artist's hand, but also a metaphor for like the destruction of the universe. And the sound from that work, well, I'll show it to you in a moment. The sound from that work is the very first audio that was recorded on Mars. And they actually found graphite on meteors that came from Mars. So I thought that was a nice connection. And then the other work is called To Get Out of the Way. And this was the most intense animation I made I think it was 600 drawings. So it was from my travelogue. So I went through all these places that I've been and created these landscapes and these figures that kind of entered and exited the landscape. And then I played the piano on it, and I don't play piano well. I play it badly, but that was sort of the point. So I did the soundtrack for it, and I'll show you both of these. So you could hear the sound, I think. It's subtle, but maybe I'll fast forward through a little bit of it so you get the idea. And people ask me like, oh, how'd you set your drawings on fire? And we had a whole setup with like 3 assistants and safety measures in place, because we couldn't do this outside. We had to do it inside in the studio. So it was, you figure out what you want to do and you figure out how to do it safely. Yeah, so you get an idea of that one. And then this one is To Get Out of the Way. It's quite long, but I'll just show you a little bit of it. Maybe there's the first segment. Oh, so what you're looking at here, you know how there's black frame video, most videos start with. So I decided I would draw my black frame. So every frame is a solid black saturated graphite surface. I know, I don't even want to do this. I just can't help it. So instead of, fade from black, it's fade from like 100 black drawings. And the people are different people that I know, artist friends or people that were on these different sites with me. So those are that. Then this is not my work. This is Philip de Champagne's Vanitas painting, Still Life with a Skull from I have it in my notes, 1669. And I was asked by the Aldrich Contemporary Art Museum, which is really one of my favorite small museums in the US. If you ever have a chance to go, you should go. They were amazing to work with too. So they asked me they basically commissioned, I guess, 3 new works for an exhibition called 2020. And they asked 7 artists to make new work that was about drawing, so sort of slow art, as the curator Richard Klein called it, that was contemplating the year 2020. And this was happening before the pandemic. But the pandemic struck and they postponed the show. And so we were allowed to kind of change the work. But actually, my original idea still worked with the pandemic, I guess, because I don't know, I deal with death a lot in my work. So I thought, I don't want to do media images. A lot of the artists went with media images of, AOC or Trump. And I just thought, no, I want to do something a little bit more ambiguous and think about history and art history. And so this was my reference for what I made. And these are drawings from the animation that I made. So I made this triptych animation that you're looking at here, and kind of referencing, the flower, the hourglass, the skull, these traditional still life motifs, and then pairing them in more contemporary settings. So you have this chain link fence. This was like a protest crowd and a disappearing kind of threatened landscape. So thinking about Vanitas, Memento Mori, and how that's totally relevant to us now. You could think of these things as metaphors for so many different political issues. The way it was shown in the space, and again, you could watch this on my website. The way it was shown in the space was at the Aldrich, they have this camera obscura room that's sort of this black room that's curved, but they plug the camera peephole for my project, but it was in this very intimate kind of curved black room that you entered. So it was very hard to photograph. We could only get it from an angle, but it was quite nice to be in there to see the work. And the sound of the piece, I wanted the sound to be very contemplative and meditative. So the idea of, the last few years, the election, the insurrection, surviving our 45th president, pandemic, like all this madness that consumed our brains. I know that my brain was just like overly consumed with this. I wanted us to contemplate that, but I also wanted it to be like meditative. So the sound really did that. So the sound that you're hearing in it is like literally a Tibetan meditation bell, white noise, and rain. So like sleep machine sound. So it's like, all right, go in here, contemplate the horrors of the last few years, but meditate while you're doing it. So that was that work. And then they decided they wanted to show some drawings too. So they wrapped and not all the drawings, there was too many, but they wrapped a selection of drawings like around the room. And then as the show unfolded, because it was up for quite a long time, they asked us to add works to the show. We could rehang the gallery, switch out works, or add new works. So what you're looking at in the center is a pedestal with pencils. And this was an artwork. So it was called From Darkness to Light. And I had these custom printed heat sensitive pencils that with your hand change, and the title would disappear, the pencil would just turn white. So kind of a metaphor, hopeful kind of metaphor, and you as a visitor could come and take one. I love a giveaway. I love, in the spirit of Felix Gonzalez Torres. And then I made this work, which cracks me up to this day. So this work is called Erased 45. And just as a fluke, I found this drawing that Donald Trump made on auction. I think it sold for like a ridiculous amount of money, like $20,000 or something. So it's basically, that's his hand, and he traced it and he signed it. So I find this drawing and I couldn't afford to buy it. So I decided, well, let me remake it. So it's an animation. What you're looking at is a video screen and then the actual drawing that was erased. So you see me making the drawing, and then you see me erasing the drawing, and then you're left with the erased paper. I don't know how well you could see it on your screens, but you could see kind of the subtle imprint there. So I was thinking about like what was surprising to me in the act of actually doing it. It was very unnerving. It was like inhabiting someone's hand is such a personal thing. Like, I don't mean like his hand, but like, someone's mark making. So, and like copying his signature, it was really unnerving. But then the erasing was very cathartic. So also thinking about Erased de Kooning, right? That work where de Kooning's drawing was erased by Robert Rauschenberg. So this idea that you could erase something like it didn't exist, but really the imprint is still there. And that was the most like overtly kind of political reference, but I still wanted to make something that was poetic, not like directly. I feel like all work is political, but I think that ambiguity gets through to people better than hitting them over the head, because oftentimes we're preaching to the choir. And if you want to reach someone that isn't aware of certain issues or doesn't agree with a certain point of view, I think subtlety is often a better approach. Then last year, I was commissioned with my friend Paula Menta. So we collaborated on this piece at Franconia Sculpture Park in Minneapolis. And so this is up for a couple of years, I think at least. And it's called Drawing for a Reliquary. And what you're looking at is everything's graphite coated, of course. Everything here was found on site. So the idea of like a sculpture park and bringing something in, but then there's like these junkyards at every sculpture park I've ever been to. There's like, not open to the public, but like Socrates Sculpture Park has one, Franconia. They have like these junkyards of stuff that artists have left behind or forgotten parts that are just sad and no one cares about. So we just wanted to source things that were there and reconfigure them and give them a new life. So this is, for scale, this I-beam is 40 feet. It's very hard to understand that in this. This is really huge. So this is 40 feet, and the tree next to it was fallen in the woods, and we actually dragged nothing that was on site. Everything was brought in, the rocks, everything. So everything was planted here from other parts of the sculpture park. So we wanted to have this relationship, to the man-made nature. This scaffolding was made from metal on site. So this was actually welded from discarded metal. And you have this tree stump that was transplanted here, but where it's cut, if this was knocked over, it would be the same length as the 40-foot beam. You had these rocks, which were not covered in graphite, but they were, polished and placed very specifically as kind of seating placements. We thought of this as sort of ritualistic, kind of memorial to, nature, to these objects, to the park, empathy again for inanimate objects. And the cuts, you could see some details. I love working with graphite outdoors because it just looks so incredibly beautiful. The cuts were silver leafed of both the tree and the I-beam and all the surfaces. Okay, so then last project, I'm going a little over, but I'll talk about this quickly. So this was my last big solo show here in New York at Mellon, and which is a great space because they let you do huge, crazy projects. One artist in a big, giant, beautiful space, which is kind of rare in New York City. And it's called Always Begin at the End. And it was really looking at the iconography of the last 5 years. So this is about 5 years worth of work. There's maybe 3 older works in here, the Chandelier you recognized from before. And it was really looking at different iconography through objects, oftentimes kind of still life objects, domestic objects, and using them as both personal and political metaphors. So I'll go through some of these install shots and I'll talk about a few of the works and then I'll take questions. So the floor is marble. I wanted to really think about dualities, opposites, right? Something that's disposable, something that's precious. The marble references like, like a display, an archive, archaeological, my own personal kind of archaeological dig, artifacts, preciousness. Also, I grew up in a house with marble floors. So it's really kind of strange to think about how those parallels. I didn't even think about that until after the show was up, my choice of the marble. I was like, oh yeah, that's probably part of it. So you could see some of the works. I'll talk about a few of them. There's a reprise of that work with these rocks on top of it, which I'll talk about. This particular, the install was like very precise. Everything was measured, thought out, like every little detail was really thought about. It was really kind of a dream show. I'm a Virgo, so everything has to be just so. And so this work here, maybe I'll talk about first, is called Perhaps Not the Model Sentiment of Devotion. So I love when one object can hold multiple ideas. So the idea, you're looking at a paper mache blind made from that custom graphite paper. And then these quartz rocks. So you have snow quartz and strawberry quartz, rose quartz, and clear quartz. And so this idea of like quartz being this, healing stone that gets you love, for example, it's a positive, has positive attributes. So if someone throws it through a window, obviously that's not like a nice gesture. So I thought about this simultaneously in terms of love and protest and misguided gestures for both, right? Like when you're trying to, if you're protesting something, is violence the answer? Is looting the answer? Is, riots? There was all these kind of conversations. I don't propose to know the answers to any of these things, but it's interesting to think about the nuances of it. There's a detail of that. That's a studio shot of the work. And these rocks are big. They're like the size of my head, so it's hard to tell in the images. The floor, you had these little moments of these rocks and pennies and bricks. Again, like I think of like pennies now as basically rocks, like they're as useless, and thinking of these as like little archaeological dig moments. Then this large work I was talking about, revealing the facade of art making. The title of this work is called Poem, A Damn Haze to Obey. And what that is a anagram from the corporations Amazon, eBay, and Home Depot. So sexy. So the reason for that is these are all the packaging materials used to produce the show. So I hate buying stuff from Amazon or Home Depot or eBay. Like any corporate support drives me crazy, but we're all guilty of it, I think. So I collected all the boxes and I wanted to transform them into something useful. And then when I came up with the anagram one night when I couldn't sleep, I was like, oh, that's perfect. Poem, A Damn Haze to Obey. It's exactly what we're going through. And so it was just a weird coincidence that it worked out that way. So you're looking at all this packaging. It's all hand drawn with graphite. It's on a surface of roof paper. So with install, like thinking about the roof paper and the marble flooring. And then you have other bits of packaging and leftovers from the studio. And here's a detail. Home Depot bags. I thought this looked like some, I don't know, heroin smuggler, those x-rays in the stomachs of mules. And then people ask me like, what is my favorite piece from this show? And this show just closed a couple of weeks ago, so it's very fresh. And I don't have a favorite piece, but there was a lot of work on that show. I couldn't possibly, it would be the whole lecture to talk about this show. But this was my favorite moment. So this little fake cigarette that was shoved in the corner of that big wall piece, kind of insinuating, I don't know, the writer for the show, Darla Megan, for the book, said like the kind of idea of like burning your whole body of work down, like the threat of that, but also like the relaxing idea of like your artwork needing a cigarette break. Colette, should I stop or should I keep going? I just have a few more.
You can keep going. It's wonderful presentation. So
Okay.
yeah, you can go for a few more minutes. Is that okay?
Yeah, it's fine.
Okay.
So is everyone okay? All right. And then this work is called, I love titles. So this one's called, I misspelled it here. I was typing fast today. Sisyphean Symbiotic Overachievement. Titles are really important to me. So I think of them as another material. You could take it or leave it. Some people don't like titles. A lot of artists don't like titles. I love them. I feel like get the checklist, look at the work first, but then read the title. I think it gets you, it points you in a direction. I don't like titles that tell you way too much, but I feel like they're another material. And I even wrote a poem for this exhibition in the exhibition catalog, which was very nerve-wracking for me. So this work is a sandblasted chair that's hand covered in graphite pencil. Then you have these porcelain sponges. And then you have a collection of pencil shavings in this glass vitrine. So there's a relationship to all of these materials and objects, but like a fake one. So obviously the sponges are porcelain, they don't clean anything. And the insinuation is that they scrubbed the sandblasted texture on, right? And then made these pencil shavings, but none of that is true. But it's just a relationship between the materiality of the objects and really thinking about your own obsessive processes as an artist and how things are connected. So it's, to me, this is like all about masochism and self-deprecation in many ways. This is very poignant. I think now I look at this very differently with the war in Ukraine happening. I was born under the USSR. So what good like former communist born person doesn't have a few sickles laying around the house? That's a joke. So this work is called The Soul Leaving the Body. It's a sickle with a ribbon, and this is all made of paper. So this is graphite pencil coated paper. I think I have a detail. Yeah, there's a detail of that and the balloon. And, you know, I purposely have these dents in it to give you the materiality that you realize, oh, that's not a balloon. Wait, that's not metal. Like, what is that? And then obviously the sickle, like there's like a relationship to that point and that destruction of that object. This work is called Business as Unusual. It's a functioning turntable. I'll go fast now. This one is called, my title is To Abate Empty Offerings, Still Life 1. And this is all hand coated fruit, tree branches, tulips, a skull is in there over here. So it's kind of a deconstructed still life on chain link fencing. It's all hand coated in graphite pencil, including the chain link fencing. And this is sort of me thinking about immigration, but really the fake fruit kind of comes from this empty offering. When I was a kid and we moved to this country, I'd go to American homes, and especially in the 80s, there was always fake fruit on people's tables. And I would grab it and thinking it was real and it'd be like, hey, that's not real, how mean. And I thought it was so cruel. Like, why would you do that? I didn't understand that because people don't do that in Europe. They don't have fake bowls of fruit. They have real fruit. And so I thought it was sort of cruel. And I thought it was a good metaphor for like immigration, today's state of immigration and what you're promised and what you're given. And the chain link fence certainly can be a metaphor for that as well. This one is called In Through the Out. It's all paper. So this is cast paper. This is abaca. This is cotton. All the wood grain is also hand drawn on this. This one is called A Line on the Earth Forges Holes in the Sky. Obviously, probably one of my most politically, driven pieces. This is a standard issue US American flag that I dissected. So all the stars have been cut out. And it's hung upside down. The stripes have been cut out, but then re-sewn into one continuous line. And the stars, it's interesting. People talk about this work as like really beautiful and poetic, and then also really violent. But I say it's both. So I really was thinking about like, how do you wring the truth out of these iconic objects? It wasn't about like destroying the flag. It was more like, what's the truth of this object? Like, where do stars belong? I'm like, stars belong in the sky. So like, let's return them to the sky. And then, the line on the earth, I was thinking about borders. And then the not so subtle little moment is the right wing is flipped on the eagle. So I reconfigured the topper of the flag. There's a detail, it's all graphite coated. And I'm not going to talk about all these. And then, all right, this is the last slide. So then at the show too, there was another giveaway, always begin at the end, another pencil pedestal. And as you sharpen it, like literally it says the end, and then all you're left with is with an eraser. The end. Okay. All right, I'm gonna have a sip of a drink here, and you could formulate any questions. I'm happy to answer.
Thank you so much. They're really wonderful presentation. I do have a few questions. Let me just grab them for you. Everybody loves your work. One person asked,
should I unshare my screen?
Sure. Yes,
Okay.
if you'd like to do that. Oh, great. Everybody can see you. Great. So someone had asked about the titling, which you answered. So you discussed that. One person was interested in what has been the most satisfying thing that you have covered or object that you have covered in graphite?
Satisfying. That means like physically satisfying. What does that mean? Like feels good to do, or just like in terms of?
So yeah. Adrian asked that. Yeah.
You know what I love covering? I love covering mother of pearl seashells. It's like a really great surface. It like is like a mirror when you coat it really heavily. The graphite, like it's as shiny as the graphite can get. So
thank you. Let's see. With your house project, I have a question about that, and there's a couple questions. Yeah. One, how long was that up for? I know you took pictures during the season. Then also, what were the reactions of the neighbors?
Yeah. Oh, there were so many stories. It was up for a little over a year. And so the house, it was a 2-year project in that they had a site lab, the organization had another group of artists do projects the second year. So I got it the first year, then Mark Dion, whom many of you might know, he did the interior of my house. So they skinned my house, or I like to think they erased the house, but you could still see lots of bits of it. So it was really decrepit on the outside. But then when you went inside, Mark Dion did this like historical Christmas scene of what the pastor's house would look like in like the 30s. It was like historical, done by museum experts. So the house, like there was still like a leftovers of it then. And then they tore it down because it really wasn't, you couldn't really restore it. So they built housing on the site afterwards. What was the other part of that question?
It was, how was the neighbors?
Oh, the neighbors. Yeah, the stories. So there was great interaction. I mean, I'm not a public artist. I'm like, museum gallery world generally, but I loved it. I was shocked how much I loved it because the interaction was also beautiful. Like I talked to so many people and they would tell me their personal stories of, how they got married here, or they, Pastor Steve was like their, mentor, or 2 kids were adopted by Pastor Steve and now are adults, and I met them too. There was a nurse that walked by, and actually I loved her comment. She was walking by one day. She didn't know what was going on. This was during the, I think it was when it was already up. And she was sort of walking by in her scrubs and just sort of did this double take. And she was like, what? And then she walked over. She's like, what is this? I don't understand what I'm looking at. Like, I thought the house disappeared. I was like, she's like, I've been walking around, by this house for years. And I didn't know, I'm like, is it a shadow? Is it a mirror? What is it? And she couldn't quite understand what she was looking at. I get that feeling too, looking at the house. But it was really interesting. Someone that was so familiar with this site. Another person who lived in the neighborhood had like all kinds of dreams about the house that he shared with me. I mean, I would get emails from people. It was pretty interesting. Yeah, I mean, there was not one bad story, and I was bracing for it. I was bracing for someone, because when you do public art, I have lots of friends who do it. There's always someone, sometimes a lot of people, that are not happy with what you do. I'm sure you see it in Miami. There's so much
Yes.
public art there, right? Everyone has a complaint, something to say, but I
Always.
don't know. I don't know how we did it, but no complaints, at least none that anyone told me.
It was amazing. Yeah, amazing presentation. That I just love that.
Thanks.
I have another question about residencies. Are you seeking residencies out yourself, or are you being approached? How does that work?
It's always different. I mean, I apply to things from time to time. I've done all these projects these last years, these big projects. I haven't rested for like 6 years. And so this year, I'm only applying to residencies where they take care of you and you don't have to work that hard. So this summer I'm going to Yaddo, which is exciting. They feed you and, you really don't have to make work. I think I'm not kidding, I'm going to go to Yaddo with one pencil, and I'm just going to make work with one pencil. And when that pencil's through, that's it. So, yeah, so I don't know, there's all kinds of different residencies, ones that you could just chill out at, ones that you have to produce body work, ones that are more theoretical, ones that fabricate for you. I love those residencies where you have like a Dieu Donne, the paper mill. They give you a master paper maker and a whole crew, and like they help translate your ideas into this other medium and material with like really skilled, brilliant people. It was incredible. I loved it.
One individual is asking about what did you learn about death through your work, your practice, that you were not aware of previously that surprised
That's
you?
a great question. Nothing. I mean, this is the funny thing. It's like, do you learn anything about death? Like, am I going to learn like why we die and what happens after we die? I mean, of course I want to know, but like my work is not going to answer that. But it doesn't mean we can't keep trying and thinking about it. I think you learn more about life. I've learned a lot about life, not so much about death. Yeah.
And then I have a question for Tom Secluded from his class.
Tom, you could ask your own question.
You want to unmute, Tom? I can.
Yeah.
Yeah. Hey, Diana. That was great. Thank you.
Thank you.
So, I guess at the beginning of the presentation, you talked a little bit, or you referenced your early practice, right? Like the performative, collaborative practice. And that's obviously in the past, but like how do you think that's kind of informed your practice now?
Well, clearly gray is something that, Adrian and Tom know that early work. I worked with another woman artist, and we wore these gray uniforms and created these gray sets and did these performative actions. And so clearly the gray is in my veins. And minimalism, certainly. I mean, the aesthetics are not so different. I could talk about why I stopped making that work. Nicole and I lived in different cities, and I started making my own work, and I did both for maybe 3 years, but then it got too difficult, and you just have to go where your work takes you. There wasn't some big, fight or anything like that.
No, I just think of like this idea of like endurance. Like that was something I really thought about in that when you were collaborating, working with the other artists. I look at this, what you're doing now, and a chain link fence covered in graphite it's absurd, you know.
It is absurd, but in you know, my studio assistants would be like, hey, she doesn't do that by herself. I have people helping me.
Yeah.
So it's not just me, you know, I have 1 to 2 studio assistants that generally work with me a few days a week. Now it's like more chill out, but during production, it's intense and we just sit around, listen to music and do this for hours.
But it's still like, it's that endurance, right?
Yeah, I love that. I mean, I totally see it now that you said it, but I hadn't thought about that. Like, yeah, it was about endurance. Even though those videos were very short that I did with Nicole, there were multiple takes to get them right. So it was exhausting to make that work. And the editing made us look good, you know. But yeah, and also just conceptually, the reason why I stopped making that work, and maybe I touched on this a little bit, was that work was, you know, very feminist work. And there's nothing wrong with that. I love feminist work. I'm a feminist, as everyone should be, to be a good human, but I just didn't know who I was talking to. And our studio visits, you know, nothing against, you know, straight males, but like whenever a straight male came to the studio, it'd be like, so are you guys lesbians or what? Like, this was the first question I would get over and over. And I was like, what? How is that even important or relevant? And, you know, it'd be one thing if one person asked, but it was constant. And it was, you know, I was like, okay, so we're being objectified, but our work, we're so not sexy in our work at all. Like, the point was to kind of take that sex appeal out of it and become these mechanical kind of beings. And I just thought, I don't know whose minds we're changing, or you can't really control how someone is going to see you, even if your intent or the content, or even the majority of the art world understands what you're doing. So I'm not saying that you can't make overtly feminist work or any kind of political work. You totally can. And, you know, you could see my work. It's not subtle, especially in this later work. But I haven't figured out how to do it where my students, you know, struggle with this a lot. Like, you know, why can't I be naked in my work without being objectified? I'm like, you totally can be naked in your work, you know, but like, you can't control how someone else is going to view you, you know, both positively and negatively. So I didn't like not having control, I guess. So that was part of why I stopped making that work as well. I think looking back, you know.
So with mechanical in mind, do you see, you know, your current practice, like that idea, you know, just like covering things in graphite, the process of that, like, do you see that as a mechanical process? Or is it about the hand, right? And the unique mark, or is it about both? Or, you know,
yeah,
like,
all of the above. It's mechanical and it's meditative. Like, the first hour of anything feels great. You're like, oh yeah, I'm chilling out. I'm thinking about anything, listening to Bauhaus in the studio, whatever. But then, like, you're like, how many days have I been doing this? Like, then it becomes labor. Then it becomes like, it's suffering. It really is. And that's what I'm really grateful for, having studio assistants that like help, you know, take some of that burden. Yeah. So yeah, it's all of those things. It's meditative, it's mechanical, it's about the hand, the mark, you know, like I was here. Like, I think it's very important too, speaking to all you young students, like, do not forget that you are a human being. And I can, you know, digital technology is great, and you certainly can use that, and it's important, especially the time we're living in, but like, don't forget you're a human being. So I think like the idea of the hand and remaining human and that visceral nature of material, like, I don't want to lose sight of that.
Wonderful. Thank you. Is there any other questions? Adrian?
Adrian.
Hi there.
Hi.
Great to see you. Hello, Tom.
You too.
Adrian.
You know, right now I'm thinking of that video that you made with Nicole where you were smacking each other across the face, of course, in relation to what just recently happened. You know,
that's funny. Yeah. Team Chris Rock, sorry.
I was going to ask if you had any thoughts on that, you know, and
on my work, or Chris Rock and Will Smith?
all of the above.
Yeah, I have thoughts on that work. I mean, that work was, we were smacking each other in that piece, but obviously the editing helps. It's like an infinite loop, so it feels much more torturous than it was. And that whole body of work was about friendship in a way. So you're very close with someone. I think this more applies to female relationships, but not necessarily. This idea of like being really close. Jerry Saltz said about that work, he said, well, you're like lionesses, like grooming each other, hunting with each other, that kind of thing. And it was true. It was like, there's this real closeness, this real intimacy. But then you're also kind of jealous of each other too, right? Like, I'm sure you've all had friends and you're like, bitch, I love you, right? So there was like this kind of ebb and flow with that work. The Chris Rock, Will Smith thing, come on, it was insanity. Will Smith needs a therapist. Therapy for everyone, that's what I believe. If I was in charge, everyone would go to rehab and everyone would go to therapy for like literally everything.
I mean, you also did a work about that too.
Oh yeah, I did. I forgot about that.
That was in the Me, Myself, and I exhibition.
Oh my God, this is my life. Yes. Yeah, Nicole and I went to a therapist and recorded it. It's true. I forgot about that piece.
Oh, this sounds wonderful. I have to look up your performative work. Yeah.
Yeah, there's bits of it. It was it was internet time, but it wasn't like, before social media,
Well, it's interesting how your work has evolved.
Yeah. I mean, you have to, I think I didn't become an artist to be like super rich. I've been fortunate that I somehow can survive in New York City as an artist. It's kind of amazing. But I want to make whatever I want to make. And I'm really happy that enough people have, supported me in doing that. But if I had to make the same thing over and over, I might as well just go be a stockbroker and make a lot more money and be equally as miserable. So, yeah.
Well, thank you. I don't think we have any more questions, but awesome presentation. So great. Thank you very, very much for joining us. Thank you, Tom, for organizing, and everyone that joined us. Please be well. And I hope to see you all soon face to face. So thank you again, Diana. Take care, everyone.
Thank you. Thanks so much. So good to see you, Tom and Adrian. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Diana.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Bye.